If somebody has gone through the trouble of having a podcast, of having a YouTube channel generally, it means they're deeply involved in sports cards. I feel like for myself, maybe that's one of the things that now that I went through that phase of being deeply thinking about how I could do a full-time job out of it and thinking about how I wanted to understand in nuanced understanding the flow of things and how people were thinking about things, and because I was actively planning to become fully engaged in it as a business. And so I was deeply in it for a while. But then after stepping back out and coming back to this phase of kind of a calm, relaxed engagement with the hobby, I realize more now that a lot of the dialogue is being directed by people who are in the business of it and are thinking about it all the time, like it is their life. But that's not actually how most people engage in the hobby. Most people engage in the hobby in a more relaxed way, and as a replacement for video game time. The dialogue we hear and what we think is the reality of sports cards are from the people who are the 100% fully invested in this space. I think most of us do participate in this more kind of relaxed way. Welcome to the channel. In this video, I want to reflect a little bit on just the current state of the hobby and how little the changes in the hobby actually affect my personal engagement with the hobby. And I think this is true for a lot of people. We get caught up in kind of the drama and the news cycles of the hobby at times. I mean, sometimes we ignore it completely. I know that if I haven't watched a YouTube video in a while about sports cards, it falls off of my algorithm and I forget there's this whole dialogue around this space sometimes. But at the same time, there is a lot of ongoing thoughts and ongoing discourse kind of in this space. But it's interesting how whatever stage things are at, it seems like the way I personally am engaging with the hobby hasn't changed and doesn't really change much. And I want to reflect a little bit on this because, I don't think it's just me. I think this is the majority of us. And I want to kind of reflect on this a little bit. So let's get into this. So first, let me just share with you a little bit about why this is even on my mind. This past weekend, I had a work trip where I had about a 2.5 hour drive away from my home here to go to this work trip, and then a 2.5 hour drive back. So I was on the road for about 5 hours, and during the time I was listening to a lot of sports card podcasts during my driving. So I was hearing a lot of things about what people were saying about the condition of the sports card hobby right now, the condition of the market, the condition of the sale of wax prices, and a lot of different things were being discussed in these podcasts as I was listening to. I enjoyed the podcast a lot, but it got me thinking about how many phases, how many changes there have been with the hobby over the past few years, but how within that, and it seems like when you listen to the discourse, there's people who are engaging it in so many different ways, or they don't like it anymore because they're not making money, or whatever it might be. There's just all these different ways that people might engage with the hobby. But I've been finding that my own engagement, whether the hobby is shooting for the moon or the hobby is on an eternal path of the values going down, it seems like the way that I engage with the hobby has never changed through this whole thing. And I think I might have shared in a video a long time ago how I got back into the hobby after a very, very long hiatus, like a lot of us did. When I was a kid, I got really into the hobby. When I think my first baseball cards were probably right around 1988, 1989 baseball, when I was really young, 7-8-year-old kid. And then I started getting into basketball cards maybe around 92, 93, something like this. And for a period of time, all the way up until, 1997, 1998, I was really into it. Probably not closer to 1997, or maybe even 1996, actually. But I was really into the hobby. I got a paper route specifically for the purpose of being able to pay for boxes of cards, usually low-end, Fleer basketball cards or Stadium Club basketball cards, and occasionally a really expensive pack of Topps Finest or Flair or something like that. But I kind of drifted away from the hobby after 1996 when actually it was really my recognition of what the junk wax era meant. That phrase might not have been around yet, but my buying cards, realizing that I wasn't getting many cards, many things in return. I remember I actually have a very vivid memory of buying a box of 95, 96 Fleer basketball cards for 40 or 50 bucks, something like that, which was 2 weeks salary as a however old I was as a 15-year-old with a paper route. I was making 120 bucks a month, waking up 7 days a week before dawn to deliver these papers and making 120 bucks. And this was almost half of my monthly salary was going into this particular box. And I remember specifically sitting in the back seat of my parents' car and opening it as we were going on a drive somewhere. And I was opening each, I was like, oh, nothing much in this car pack. Oh, nothing much in this pack. And as I kept going through, I kept opening them. I mean, there's 36 packs or something. And I kept opening these and opening these. And the best card I had was like, a common card of the PC guy that I collect. There was not a single card that was worth more than about $1. I had my Beckett handy with me. And so I was looking up cards, and there was nothing that was more valuable than $1. To me at that age, that was really frustrating. It was like, oh my God, this paper route is so much work, and I got nothing from these cards. I think I'm going to start putting my money elsewhere. I didn't have it in my mind yet to the idea of like buying individual cards. I did some, when I looked back through some of the cards I had from this age, it was kind of interesting, some of the cards that I found, some like 1970s Willie Stargell baseball cards. And, I had identified some cards that I thought I wanted to have that I just thought were cool. And some of those were either older ones or a few specific inserts from sets that it was difficult for me to afford to buy, like more than a pack a month or something, Finest or Flair or something like that. But there was certain insert cards that I did really love and would aim for. Or, I would meet with friends and trade and things like that. But oftentimes, the friends I would trade with most often, they were also buying the same kind of low-end stuff. So we were just trading penny cards for penny cards, essentially. And I did have one friend who had, like, really some nice cards. In fact, I think, I can't remember for sure, but I think he might have had the Michael Jordan Scoring Kings card. I think he had it. But whenever I would try to trade anything for anything, this particular friend of mine was very much always wanting to win the trade. So it was very difficult to ever trade with him. So anyway, that's all to say, when I was at this age, some of the friends who I was trading with, they were starting to fade away from the hobby. The value I was finding from packs wasn't there. So I just kind of drifted away from the hobby. Now, I know that a lot of people have this story, like when they came back into the hobby during COVID years or whatever, because they were stuck at home. Like, my story is a little bit different. I think it follows a somewhat similar timeline, but really for a completely different kind of reasoning behind it. It was also related to COVID. When I was in COVID, if you've been following this channel, you would know that I lived in China for a very long time. My wife is from China. I lived in China for about 17 years. And at the time that COVID hit, we were living in a relatively rural area of China. And, we had our life was set up in such a way before COVID that was really nicely balanced, where my parents were going to be living with us in this city for 6 months of the year, and then back in the U.S. for 6 months of the year. And then we were going to be able to go back for the summer for 3 months every year. So it kind of be like, we'd have my parents around quite a bit to help with homeschooling, because we were doing homeschooling with our kids. And then we'd have this nice balance of having this experience and this life in kind of rural China, which was great and which was wonderful for the kids, while also kind of having this connection to family and to being in the U.S. regularly. So it was a nice, like we were working out this nice balanced lifestyle. But then COVID hit and the borders all closed, and then we kind of got this idea of being in like a kind of remote part of semi-rural China went from being like, oh, such an adventurous, wonderful thing, to being like, we are stuck here and feeling very like trapped there. And I remember very vividly having, after that had gone on and on and on, and just a feeling of like wanting to get back and see my family and be in my culture for a period of time, because I lived in China for 17 years, but I always found that after if I was in a kind of remote place like that, I would be super happy for like 11 months, but I need like a month or something just to be someplace else, be in a different kind of environment, especially if it was in my home culture. And then I could go back, and that was enough. It was like recharging the batteries to go back, and I would prefer to be in this kind of remote place in semi-rural China, which I was really loving. But after getting stuck there for so long, I started to have like this deep desire. I was homesick, more homesick than I had ever been. I'd lived in China for 17 years, and I had never really experienced homesickness quite to this type of level. I'd had little feelings of homesickness, but nothing like this. So essentially what I started doing was just searching for things that would remind me of home. Like I was at this period of time like eating a lot more Western food. Usually we would eat mostly Chinese food. I was eating more cheese. Like it wasn't because I like specifically craved having cheese more. It's because I had been having cheese and I just wanted something that reminded me of home. It was like this nostalgia thing for anything that had a connection to home. And it was around this time that I was doing some just research online, and I came across just on the website Taobao, which is like the Amazon of China, basically. It's the biggest marketplace in China, online marketplace, massive thing, bigger than Amazon. It's huge. And I saw sports cards on there. It's like, sports cards. haven't thought of these in a long time. So I looked in there and I saw, these different products. And so I started to do some research, like what has been going on with this world, I knew I had all these cards back there that I looked at every once in a while. Back in the US, I knew I still had some boxes of cards that I would look at, when I'd come back and visit briefly. But, my visits were always kind of short. So I never wanted to spend super long time just looking at my sports cards. So I would look through them and just remind myself of some of my favorite ones or the ones that I put in top loaders and stuff. But in general, I hadn't really thought much about sports cards during this 17-year span of time that I was in China. Just thinking it was just one of these things. When you move to a foreign country, there's certain things from your life that you just expect to not be part of your life anymore because you're in a different place. You have different patterns. You have different things that you're learning about. You have different surroundings. Wonderful. I thought that was a good experience for me, a good experience for my kids. But it also meant that I thought that I was far away from sports cards. But during this searching, after I realized that there was sports cards on Taobao, I started to search more about sports cards and came to realize that actually China has a lot of sports cards. There's not sports card shops in the same way that there was when I was a kid growing up in the US, but sports cards was a massive hobby here. And so I started doing more and more research. I found a couple of cards. There's one that I bought and I flipped it to sell by now, and I'm going to have to just re-find it just because it really, I feel like it's the one that probably would kind of symbolize my return to the hobby. And it was a PSA 10 of Damian Lillard. If I find the picture, I'll just put up a not the one, I don't own it anymore, but I'll put up a picture of the same card on screen. And it was a Damian Lillard rookie from 2020, 2013 from Panini Brilliance, and it was an insert set, and it was a PSA 10. It was a cool card, and I got it for a really good deal. And it was the very first card. At first I was just going to buy one card, and I think I also bought, I think I've even made a video of this, so I could probably refer to that. But I bought, a pack also, or a relatively inexpensive box. So I had these two things. I had one box, and I had one single card of my favorite player from a card that I just thought looked cool. And I thought that was that was it. I thought this was just something I was going to do because of this nostalgia, and I just wanted oh cool, I'm going to add this one to my sports card collection when I get back. Maybe I would add a card to my collection every 5 years in between times. I had a friend who gave me Nick Van Exel autograph card. Nick Van Exel was my main guy that I was collecting growing up, that I'm still collecting now. I'm collecting his autographs and everything as much as I can find ones that I like the look of. So my friend got me one of those. So I had those. Or every 5 years, maybe I would get some kind of card when I would be back in the US. So it was always kind of vaguely in the back of my mind sort of thing. But it was this nostalgia of wanting to get reconnected to the hobby that made me buy at this time. And once I bought that card, I was there's this wave of kind of memory and nostalgia that wafted over me. And opening the packs was a lot of fun too. I think I did get a decent card in there. I think my ROI, if you want to call it that, on that particular pack was okay. I think I at least got my value back. But I really love that, and that feeling of nostalgia was really strong. So I started to do a lot more kind of deep dive into wanting to learn more and more and more about what had been going on in the hobby. Now, at this time, I think it was already the COVID craziness related to sports card values, of sports card values spiking like crazy. This had already happened by this time. I missed that wave. I missed that craziness. I wasn't involved in the conversations. I didn't know what was going on. When I was first getting back into the hobby, I didn't know the YouTube space and all these podcasts around this existed. These things weren't part of the sports card landscape when I was a kid, so it didn't cross my mind to look on YouTube for sports card content or anything like that. I don't know why it didn't. I watched YouTube regularly for other things about gardening and tiny houses and permaculture and some of these other things that I was in, and hip hop and some of these other things I was really interested in. I was regularly looking on YouTube. In fact, I'd even been going through some different phases of trying to figure out if there was a way for me to actually make a little bit of a side hustle from a YouTube channel. And I had made several different YouTube channels about a couple different topics related to homeschooling my kids, related to China, related to some just research about different geography things. And I tried the number of different YouTube channels. None of them really stuck, but I had been getting this experience too. But then when I started to look more, I started to realize, wow, as I'm learning about the Chinese sports card market, I'm realizing that there are big differences between what is sought in each place, what is available in each place. And around this time is when I discovered the website Card Hobby, which I've also made a bunch of YouTube channels which I've also made a bunch of videos about that. And I started to explore and started to discover that because of the different market dynamics in the Chinese domestic sports card world and in the eBay world, which is mostly the US, but also quite international, but really mostly the US, I started to realize that there was something in here, that I could actually be identifying cards that I could buy for myself in China, or I could be identifying cards that are much cheaper in China than they are in the US. And then I figured out this whole process, went through searching, found COMC, found various ways that I could go about doing this, and then kind of started this arbitrage process, and this is, at this time I also was like, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to make some YouTube videos about this, show people what I'm doing. And that's kind of really how my YouTube channel began in the first place. I had already been learning a little bit about making YouTube videos previously in other topics, but now this was like this new thing I was experimenting with, and it just lent itself to really making some more interesting YouTube videos than maybe I had been making previously. And it helped me to kind of systematize my own learning with everything, and to kind of put into words what I was experiencing, and kind of capture the moment, and capture the feeling, and capture the nostalgia that I was experiencing, and the fun I was having with this new hobby that I had been reinvigorated in my life. And then over time, as that was, I don't know, 2020 or whatever, over time, I started to engage with the hobby in diverse ways. I would try to figure out a little bit. I was learning more about different marketplaces. I was learning more about what was happening with grading. I was learning more about the nuance of different things. I was learning more about history of different sets, and getting into that, which I still really love to look closely at the history of different sets in the hobby. So I was doing a lot of these different aspects of the hobby. But one thing that I, in retrospect, am coming to realize is, if I was, as I was listening to the wider discourse about sports cards at this time, it was like this either, people were always talking about these crazy high values, and this constant value was coming down, and they were talking about it was kind of talking about sports cards in the same language that people might talk about crypto and NFTs and all this kind of stuff. But through all of that, I was listening to it, interested in how people were talking about it, but it never seemed to attach to the way I was engaging with the hobby. I was engaging with the hobby in this kind of steady way that was fun, that I was making a bit of money, I was finding some cards for my PC, and it was steady. And I was learning a lot as I went along. But one thing that was really interesting, there was all this doom and gloom talk in the sports card. Well, cards keep coming down. When are they going to hit the bottom? When I entered back into the hobby and started doing things in the hobby, the card value had continually gone down from the time I entered until just recently. The entire time. There was never a time when I was back in the hobby where card values in general weren't going down. Literally the entire time, because I missed the spike. So from the time I got in, it was already on the downward part of the spike. And despite that, I've been making money the whole way through, because I'm not trying to ride the wave. I'm trying to just find something lower and then sell it for higher. I'm not trying to ride the wave. I'm not trying to invest. I'm not trying to prospect and find that particular player whose cards are going to expand, blow up. I never was approaching it that way. And maybe I would have had I been in the US. My particular context being in China meant that the specific cards I had available to me were basketball and soccer. I didn't know soccer too much. I've gradually been learning a little bit more about it because it's just interesting. I like the sports card space in soccer, and it's international group. I kind of like the soccer space. I've been learning a little bit more about it, but it was basically those two. There wasn't a lot of baseball. There wasn't a lot of football in the Chinese domestic market. And I did collect baseball cards quite a bit as a kid, and I did follow baseball quite a bit as a kid, and played baseball as a kid. So baseball next to basketball was my biggest sport. I never really cared too much about football. I never really watched the NFL. I've tried to get into it at different phases of life, just because I have a lot of friends who are into it. I'm from Eugene, which is the home of the Oregon Ducks, the best college football team in the nation right now. So I'm in a culture that also has appreciation for at least college football, not so much NFL football, because there's not really an NFL team very close by here. But I never followed that one. But it didn't matter that much, because those weren't the cards that were really available to me in the way that I was engaging with the hobby. So it was okay. I was just like, well, I guess I'm not going to engage with baseball too much, and I kind of wish I could have a little bit more. And then with football, I was like, I didn't care to engage with it too much. I never collected football cards as a kid either. I kind of forgot they existed, to be honest. When I was a kid, it's interesting to me coming back into the hobby since that time. I recognized how football in the U.S. was such the biggest card space, and I kind of was trying to remember if it was like that back in the 90s, because in my engagement in the hobby as a kid, it was only basketball and baseball. And football, I barely remember, but I really think that's much more the culture of Oregon than anything else. Like, I think basketball is bigger here. We have the Portland Trail Blazers. Basketball seems to be the sport that you play with your friends. That at least when I was growing up, it was more of the social sport that you would do with people. Go down to the park on the weekends and play basketball. Sometimes baseball was also a popular sport and everything as well. But football never was that much. Like, I don't even have memories of, like, I don't know if I ever attended like a football game in high school. Like, I definitely wasn't on the team or anything like that, but I don't think I ever even went to one. Like, it didn't even cross my mind to think about that. I think that's just something a little bit, like, maybe the culture of the part of Oregon that I'm from that's a little bit different than some other parts of the U.S. My hometown is called Tracktown, USA, so track is a big one. Biking is a big one for, like, actual doing and exercise and stuff like that. But I think basketball and baseball were the two biggest, like, sports that people would follow among the people, at least the people I knew in high school. Not that many followed the NFL. Some did. I mean, I do remember doing a little bit of, like, fantasy football here and there when I was a kid. I followed it a little bit. So I did do some of that, but it was really baseball and basketball were the big ones. But, the original thought of this video was how interesting it is to me how once I found kind of this way of engaging with the hobby that wasn't so dependent on the waves of values going up and down. It was a little bit more just dependent on finding the good deals and selling them, and doing this in, like, this kind of international arbitrage type of method. And then within that space, finding cards for my PC, that my profit would be able to pay for my PC, and I'd still make a little bit of money on top. And this evolved, I got better and better at this to such a point where I got this close to actually starting to do it full time. I've made videos about that as well. There was a person in China who was interested in a business that, once I moved back to the States, he was kind of looking for somebody that was going to be rooted in the States, and he had already, like, thought through a number of different steps through a business idea. He had all the connections you need in Shanghai. He's actually kind of a well-known, somewhat famous collector in certain circles. He has a phenomenal collection. And so we had been talking and going deep, actually, into, like, a business plan and figuring out all the steps and the budget. Like, actually, we were really deep into the process of figuring out, what this might look like. So actually, when I first was moving back from China to the U.S., I thought this was going to be the plan. Like, it was really set. Like, I felt like it was set in stone. We were just waiting for one other investor that he had pulled together. He had pulled together a few investors, and and we were just waiting to get going. And then I came back to the States, and then he kind of ghosted me. I tried to communicate with him several times, but after a while, he just ghosted me completely. I've made videos about that. That was also really frustrating. I'm sharing because for me, but that engagement with, like, ramping up and doing a little bit more with sports cards, it actually had nothing to do with the ups and downs of the card market at the time. The card market was still on a steady decline the whole time through. It was still on a steady decline. My activity level was increasing during that time in the hobby, but it was mostly because I saw this possibility of, when I moved to the US, having this be kind of a full-time business. So I was really exploring this deeply. So I was going more, I was spending a bit more money, I was making a bit more money, and I was really trying to see if this method, this idea that we had for this business, if it was a sustainable business idea. I still think it could be. In retrospect, I'm kind of glad that I didn't pursue this as a business, because I recognize that, having a work-life balance with that kind of business would be quite difficult, and it would take a lot of work. And there was a lot of different kind of elements of the business that we were trying to build. It was really, in a lot of ways, it was trying to build a bridge between collectors in China and collectors in America, and trying to create some different ways of making it a little bit more of a seamless thing for people in these two different marketplaces that both are massive marketplaces. So we had a lot of different elements of the idea related to grading, related to consignment, related to related to international shipping, warehouse type of things. We had a lot of things in mind, as well as continuing the same thing I'd been doing about like buying things in one market that sell better in another and then move it over there. Also this kind of arbitrage thing. So a combination of a lot of these things that we were talking about. We were even talking about like, we had connections with all kinds of collectors in China who, some of them are probably the ones who are selling at shows like the Asia Sports Card Show now that happens every year, at least 2 years in a row in Macau. A lot of those same collectors were connected to this particular person who was going to be my partner. And so we also had some ideas of maybe helping some of those sellers in China who didn't have access to sports card shows to also be able to sell cards for them at card shows and things like this, and to be able to buy specific cards, look for cards for them in the US, and kind of create different ways of just building this bridge between collectors in these two countries, which are definitely the two places where there's more sports card people than anywhere. So this was all part of the plan, and this is where I was ramping up some more of my efforts. But once that fell through, I kind of just went back to the same patterns that I had been before. This kind of steady engagement with the hobby in the same type of way, finding cards for a low price, selling them for a little bit higher, finding cards for my PC as I'm doing that. Just kind of this relatively boring, actually, you could say, like if you look at it from an outside perspective, a relatively boring way of engaging with the hobby, but one that I really loved, and it went back to, during that period of time where I was more actively involved with it. Like, that was also during the span I didn't have work yet. When we moved to America, I didn't have a job right away. So I was trying to explore the possibility of this being my job. So I wasn't actively searching for other jobs. I was doing a little like side stuff here and there, like just to bring in a little bit. And then we had some savings, so we were fine for a period of time. So there was no rush. So I could kind of try to figure this out for a little while. But then once it went from like being kind of like the replacement of a job, and I knew that wasn't going to be my job, and I found another job, great job, much happier at the particular job I have. Instead, sports cards kind of took the space of what might be like, my movie watching time, if I want to watch a movie by myself or play a video game by myself. It kind of replaced that part of my life, not a very big part, but just something that I might do, when I just need a little bit of relaxation time and just kind of kick back and let the pressures of the life kind of like go off the shoulders. And that was kind of became the space where the hobby was. It was in this kind of relaxing hobby mode. I really think it's actually the best comparison in my life patterns is to like video games. Like if I fall out of wanting to do sports cards for a while, then maybe I fall into playing video games for an hour a day, playing computer games for an hour a day. If there's like, I had a period of time back, just a few months ago when I wasn't making as many YouTube videos. And actually a big part of that was because like I got Cyberpunk 2077 and I started to enjoy it. And so in the times that I would normally be engaging with sports cards, I was playing Cyberpunk. So it was like my replacement for sports cards, as a hobby for a period of time. Then once I finished that game, then the hobby went back into those time slots and I started making more videos and things like this again. But so it's just to say like that the hobby was more of like taking up the hobby space in life, which is a smaller amount of time and it's a smaller amount of focus. But it's also for the purpose of kind of taking weight off, of relaxing, of kind of like, my life in general is quite busy, I would say. I'm involved in a lot of different things. So this became kind of just one of these ways of helping to create kind of a balanced life. And, it's interesting because in the same span of time, when you listen to the dialogue around sports cards, it's hectic. It's like, you got to buy now, you got to sell now, you got to time the market right, you got to you got to go to sports card shows, is the hobby collapsing, whatever it might be. There's a lot of like fast paced, like hyper stuff going on in the hobby. But my engagement was very bland, very slow, very relaxing. And that's the way that I like it, actually. I realize that it's not the kind of engagement with the hobby that's going to make me a multi-millionaire, but I do make money in the hobby. It's just like I'm not rushing to try to make a career out of it. I'm just doing it here and there for fun because I'm loving the process. And if I broke even at the end of all of it, then I'd consider that a success because I enjoy the time. It's not like when I played Cyberpunk 2077 for a few weeks or for maybe a month and a half or whatever it was. Like I wasn't expecting some outcome from that. I wasn't expecting to make some money from that. It's just I enjoyed the process for that like 6-week period of time where I was until I finished that game. And that was the value of it. In the sports card world, if I can put in the same amount of time and like break even, then that's very valuable. Then I'm like, that's great. That's perfect. I've just had this fun experience for this period of time and it didn't cost me anything. Wonderful. And, on the flip side, I actually am making some profit in all of this. So, like, it's even better. It's like icing on the top of the cake. It's, like, super fun, plus a little bit of income, side income for stuff. So that's great. So anyway, I feel like this is just one of those things that doesn't get talked about much in the YouTube world or in sports card content because, a lot of the content is about the value, is about the market of things, is about like what cards you should buy now, what cards you should sell, what the value of wax, if it's increasing, decreasing, what are the hits that you're going to be chasing in this set, the pro debut patches in baseball now, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of like things that are related to the value, which are the more interesting topics of conversation. Maybe. I mean, there's not as much to say when you're just wanting to talk about the cards that you might be collecting. There's a lot to say about history. History is one that I think that there's a lot that you can say about history and history of sets. And, I do have made a number of videos about that, and I do enjoy that part of things that you could talk about more. But a lot of the news and it's related to the economy of the sports card world. And that's where the movement happens. And so it makes sense that there's more conversations in the space where there's more changes and more movement and more things within the business, within the money, within those types of spaces. So it makes sense that that's what the dialogue in the hobby discourse kind of talks about. Because what fun is it for me to just say I'm engaging with the hobby in this very slow-paced, relaxing, making $3 here, $5 here, $10 here. Like that's not as interesting from a content standpoint. So it doesn't get produced, and so it doesn't become part of the discourse as much. But I feel like it's actually probably closer to the way that a lot of us engage with the hobby, whether you're trying to make money, whether you're trying to improve your collection. Most of us, I think, are actually engaged with the hobby in this kind of relaxing, mellow way where it's just a fun thing we do here and there. And I think that it's valuable to realize that, to realize that. Because it also, I think, slowing down your engagement with the hobby and thinking about what is the purpose, why are you actually engaging with this hobby, is a thought exercise that's really useful. It has been for me. I'm engaging with this hobby not just to make money, though I hope to, and I hope to make decisions that will allow me to do this. I'm engaging with this hobby not only to have a personal collection. I do have a personal collection, but I'm not trying to like get a super valuable one. I don't like holding on to cards that are super, super valuable just to keep for myself. If I buy an expensive card, I'm usually doing it because I got a good price on it and I want to sell it. I don't want to keep expensive stuff. That's not just cards. That's anything. Even if I was a multimillionaire, I don't feel comfortable owning expensive things. I have a 1996 Ford Ranger out there. It's an old truck, and I love it. Like, my parents will oftentimes try to convince me, like, you should sell that thing. It's getting so old. You should buy something new. And I'm like, I don't want to spend, $20,000. I have this thing, and it works. I don't want to spend $20,000. It's just like I don't like. For myself, I'm not judging other people who do. I don't like participating in this intensive consumerist culture that sometimes the sports card world can become. If it's for me to keep, I want some Nick Van Exel autograph cards. I want some 1990s, inserts that I really liked as a kid. I want some, early basketball cards from the 60s and 70s. A handful of like baseball Hall of Famers. If I can get some 50s baseball cards or older stuff or non-sports stuff that's vintage and just has an interesting story behind it, or occasionally like some other historical figure that just stands out. Like there's boxers like Joe Louis or Jack Johnson who I just find their stories to be fascinating. So like I'd love to have something that kind of captures that thing that I find fascinating and that just captures a story. Like those are the things that I want to have in my personal collection, but those are not valuable necessarily. But anyway, so I don't have a big desire to collect a lot of super valuable cards for myself. That's just to say, again, I'm learning things. I'm sharing my learning in this video, but actually, like, the way I engage with the hobby is kind of a mellow, relaxed type of way to engage with the hobby. And I think that's the way most of us do. And I think that's what holds a steady hobby. In the fast movement days, of COVID and people jumping into the hobby trying to make a bunch of money and all this kind of movement happening and buy low, sell high quickly, see this hype happening and sell, that still does happen. You still have cycles of that happening, especially in football. You can see it with quarterbacks, and you can see like the incredible jumps of certain QBs. Like, this guy's gonna be it, and then boom, it crashes over and over and over again. It keeps happening. Like, it's amazing when you don't follow football that closely. It's actually amazing to see how, Mac Jones, Will Levis, all these guys are mentioned, with such awe, and dominoes one by one just falling back down. Now people like laugh at like, they're third string, they're never going to be any good, As somebody who doesn't actually follow football that closely, but in the world where I'm listening to different podcasts and stuff about sports cards, personally I'm more interested in basketball stuff, but oftentimes in the sports card world, the podcasts and things talk about football, baseball, basketball, all of these sports. So I hear about football more often in relation to cards than I do in relation to the sport, just because I don't follow the sport that closely. And watching how football, like the changes in discourse around football QBs, from year to year is just hilarious to me. It's like, so anyway, this is really, I hope this video wasn't too rambling. I know that I had a particular idea with this video, but sometimes I like to have a very clear, almost scripted out thing to talk about in these videos, and sometimes I like to freestyle it, and occasionally when I'm freestyling it, it gets a little bit all over the place. So hopefully this wasn't too much rambling, and it was a valuable conversation for you guys. I'm very curious to just hear some of your thoughts. We covered quite a number of different topics at different phases along this video, but if anything jumps out to you, or certain topics that you like, or that you have any comments on, please do share in the comments below. I really do, and I've said this in the past, one of the reasons I am sticking with the YouTube channel, even as my engagement with the hobby becomes more relaxed and, not super deeply involved, but still, just a relaxed involvement, the YouTube channel is going to stay. And a big part of that is because my favorite, above the money making or the personal card collecting part of the hobby, my favorite is the community building aspect of it, of actually connecting with people, and this YouTube channel, I feel, is one of those ways that I can do that in an authentic way. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I wonder how long it's going to be at the end, but maybe this is more like a podcast. Maybe this is the type of video that hopefully you were just like driving, for a while, and you can just kind of listen to these rambling thoughts and think about what you think about it as well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.